Hello everyone. Welcome to BlazorPlate. BlazorPlate is a boilerplate starter template for building multi-tenant and multilingual Blazor WebAssembly applications. Most of today's systems share similar requirements such as security and confidentiality requirements. Implementing these requirements over and over is a tedious and time-consuming process. With BlazorPlate, software development becomes easier than ever, as it provides you with almost everything you need to start building your next project. In this series, I will walk you through some of the outstanding features of the best Blazor WebAssembly starter template ever made. I will also show you how these features can save enterprises a fortune by significantly reducing development costs and increasing productivity, not to mention the time and effort that will be saved. In this episode, I will show you how to create a new tenant from within the BlazorPlate environment and sign up for a new account on the tenant portal. Also, I will show you how the authorization system in BlazorPlate prevents unauthorized users from accessing any restricted resources. First of all, let's go to the BlazorPlate website to create a new demo tenant. When you click on the live demo link, you will be transferred to the host app. The host app allows us to create a new tenant. In the tenant name text box, I'm going to use a virtual business name as the name of my new tenant. Notice that the system generates a new subdomain based on the tenant name that I've just typed. When I click on the Create My Tenant button, the system will transfer me to my tenant portal. Now I'm going to use the default admin credentials to log into my tenant portal. These credentials have been generated automatically during the tenant creation. As I have successfully logged into my tenant portal, I'm going to try to access a restricted resource such as the users list page. I can access this page because I have valid credentials with sufficient permissions. To see how the system detects unauthorized access to this page, I'm going to log out, and then I'm going to try to access the users list page without signing into my account. As we can see, the system automatically transferred me to the 401 page, which indicates that I'm not authorized to access the users list page. The 401 page contains a redirect link to the login page, so I'm going to click on that link to log in as an admin once again. After login, the system will automatically transfer me to the same users list page that I requested previously. This time, I'm allowed to create, retrieve, update, and delete users as I have valid credentials with sufficient permissions. The authentication and authorization process will be addressed in more detail later in this series. Now I'm going to log out and sign up for a new user account to show you how the account registration process works in BlazorPlate. I should receive the account confirmation link in my email inbox so I can use it to prove that the email I'm using in this sign-up form is an actual email. Instead, the system transferred me to an email confirmation page that includes a confirmation link as we don't have a real email sender service set up at this moment. I'm going to click on the confirmation link to confirm my new account. The system will verify the account confirmation link. If the confirmation link is valid and not expired, the system should respond with a message indicating that my account has been successfully verified. Now I can use my confirmed email as a username to sign into my demo tenant portal. Thank you for watching. In the previous episode, I have registered in the system as a new user using an email address. In this episode, I'm going to show you how BlazorPlate enables users to build up their profiles by uploading a profile picture and adding some basic information. So let's go to the user account settings. From the Avatar tab, I'm going to upload an avatar picture for my profile. Notice that I can rename the picture that I've just selected before uploading. After saving the form, the system will respond with a message indicating that the account has been updated successfully. This is a localized message generated by the backend server according to the user language preference. I will explain localization and multilingual support in more detail in the following episodes. Now let's go to the Profile tab to add some basic information. notice that the profile picture I've just uploaded is still not showing up. The reason is that the path of the profile picture is a part of the user's access token, which contains some other information, such as the roles and permissions assigned to the user. The only way to get the latest version of that information is to obtain a new access token. Therefore, I'm going to save this form, then I'm going to log out and then log back into my account to force the authentication system to generate a new access token. The new access token should contain the most recent information related to my account, including the path of the profile picture, job title, first and last name. As we can see, the user profile picture is showing up alongside the full name and the job title. An access token is an object that the client application uses to make API requests securely on behalf of a user. In the following episodes, I will explain in more detail how the access token works in conjunction with other security-related features within BlazorPlate's environment. Thank you for watching. In the previous episode, we saw how the system users can easily build up their profiles within BlazorPlate's environment. In this episode, I'm going to show you how users can also update their login credentials. So I'm going to go to the Account Settings page to change my current password from the Password tab. Before doing this, I'm going to click on the eye icon to reveal the passwords that I'm going to type. After saving the changes, I'm going to go to the Email tab to switch the email link to my account. By default, the username in BlazorPlate is the same as the email address. Usually, in some other systems, the user cannot switch the email link to their account, but in the BlazorPlate environment, I can easily link my account to another email. The new email will get validated by sending an account confirmation link to the new email address immediately after saving the form. Now I'm going to sign into my account using the new email and the new password. As we can see, I managed to keep my current account even though I changed my username. Thank you for watching. It is axiomatic that the users cannot log into the systems and identify themselves unless they have valid login credentials. As we saw in the previous episodes, the only way to access the system is to have a valid username and password. But what if the user credentials have been compromised? How to prevent malicious users from accessing the system illegally using another user's credentials? The security features in BlazorPlate play a significant role in protecting the user's accounts and the system data. One of these features is the two-factor authentication, which works as a second line of defense against any potential security threats. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to enable the two-factor authentication feature within the BlazorPlate's environment. I'm going to go to the User Account Settings page to enable the two-factor authentication feature. From the Two-Factor Authentication tab, I'm going to click on the Add Authenticator App button. As we can see, the system responds with a pop-up containing detailed instructions about how to enable the two-factor authentication feature using your smartphone device. As shown in the instructions, you should install the Authenticator app on your smartphone in order to enable the two-factor authentication. First, I need to get the Authenticator app verified by the system and link it with my account. This can be done by scanning the QR code shown in the pop-up using the Authenticator app, which is already installed on my smartphone. After I scanned the QR code using my Authenticator app, a new code was generated for me. Now I'm going to enter the code in the code field. Alternatively, you can enter this key manually in your Authenticator app in order to generate the Authenticator code. It's a good option if you have a non-functioning camera in your smartphone. Now I'm going to click on the Verify button. As we can see, the system responds with a message indicating that my Authenticator app has been successfully verified. Now I have my Authenticator app verified and linked with my account, so I can use it whenever I want to sign into my account. Notice that the system also generated some recovery codes. I can use these codes during login if my smartphone is not available at that moment. I'm going to explain how to use these codes later in this episode. Now, after enabling the two-factor authentication, I'm going to log out then log back into my account to see how the two-factor authentication works in BlazorPlate. During the login process, I will get authenticated in 2 steps. In the first step, the system prompts me to provide my login credentials as usual. In the second step, the system will ask me to provide the authenticator code that I can get from my authenticator app on my smartphone. Think of it as another key to open a second door, and that's why it's called two-factor authentication or two-step authentication. Now I'm going to use the authenticator app to generate the authenticator code, and then I'm going to enter that code in the code field and submit it. Now I logged into my account successfully as the authenticator code I've just used was valid. Suppose my smartphone is not available at the moment I want to sign into my account. What should I do in this situation? Well, do you remember the recovery codes that were generated when I enabled the two-factor authentication? There was a message indicating to keep those codes in a safe place so that you can use them later if your smartphone that has the authenticator app is not available at the moment you want to sign into your account. So I'm going to log out and then log back into my account using the recovery code. I'm going to fill in my login credentials as usual, and then I'm going to choose to log in with recovery code. I'm going to submit one of the recovery codes that I already have. Remember that the recovery code is a one-time code and cannot be reused. Now I managed to log into my account successfully without using the authenticator app. In case you consumed all of your recovery codes, you can obtain a new list of recovery codes from the two-factor authentication tab in your account settings. You will find an option to reset your recovery codes by generating new ones. Thank you for watching. In this episode, we will explore some of BlazorPlate's features that enable system users to request a resend of the email confirmation, reset their passwords, back up their account data, and permanently delete their accounts. I'm going to use Donald Foster's account to examine these features. It's the same account that I created in the first episode. Now, I'm going to show you how to resend the email confirmation link in case you couldn't find it in your email inbox for some reason. First of all, I'm going to deactivate Donald Foster's account using SQL Server Management Studio by changing the email confirmed field value from true to false. Now, I'm going to try to log into the system using Donald Foster's credentials to see the effect of the update command that I've just executed. Notice that the system responds with a message indicating that the user's email is not confirmed yet. So when I click on the resend email confirmation link, the system will prompt me to provide the account email I want to confirm. After clicking on resend button, I should receive the account confirmation link in my email inbox so I can use it to prove that the email linked to my account is an actual email. Instead, the system transferred me to an email confirmation page that includes a confirmation link as we don't have a real email sender service set up at this moment. I'm going to click on the confirmation link to confirm my new account. The system will verify that the account confirmation token is valid, and then it will respond with a message that my account has been successfully verified. Now I can use a confirmed email to log into the system as Donald Foster using a valid password. Now I'm going to log out and log back into the same account using an invalid password. The system should respond with a message indicating that the password I entered is invalid. We can usually assume that legitimate users might mistype their password once or twice, but not numerous times. Therefore, multiple failed login attempts can indicate that someone is trying a brute force password attack. In the following episodes, I will show you how to use the built-in security settings in BlazorPlate to enable the system to detect suspicious login activities. Now suppose I forgot my password, and I want to reset it. I can click on this link to reset my password. The system should prompt me to enter the email address with which I've signed up. When I click on the Verify button, the system responds with a message indicating that a password reset link has been sent to my email and also transfers me to this page that indicates that I should check my email inbox. As we don't have a real email sender service set up at the moment, I will click on this link, which is the same link that I should receive in my email inbox. Now I can enter a new password for my account. If the new password meets the system password policy, the system should transfer me to the confirmation page containing a link to the login page. I'm going to log into the system to show you how to delete your account and how to take a backup of your account before deleting it permanently. From the account settings, go to the Personal Data tab, then click on the Download button to download your account data in JSON format. Downloading account data becomes a valuable feature when a user wants to delete their account permanently, and at the same time, they want to keep a copy of their account data for some reason. Now suppose you don't need to use this account anymore, you can delete it forever by clicking the Delete My Account button. The system will prompt you to type your account password for security reasons. After deleting your account, the system will automatically log you out and respond with a message indicating that your account has been deleted successfully and you can no longer use it. Thank you for watching. In the previous episodes, we saw how users can sign up for new accounts and manage their own accounts. In contrast, the system admin should also be able to manage the system users and grant them the proper privileges to access a specific resource. This can be done using the role-based authorization approach. Role-based authorization in ASP.NET Core is a way to restrict users from accessing protected resources in the application. Using the role-based authorization, you can specify the allowed roles in the authorize attribute that can be declared at the API controller level or at the controller actions level. The authorize attribute forces the system to restrict users based on the roles assigned to them. For instance, the delete method is accessible only to users who have the role superadmin assigned to them, and so on. The roles list usually keeps growing as long as the application keeps scaling. As the roles count increases, it becomes harder and harder to properly manage roles. What about scenarios where you want to dynamically add or remove a particular role from the system? Wouldn't this be annoying since you have already hard-coded a role onto your API controllers? These are the major limitations of role-based authorization. We need a more flexible approach to handle the entire authorization process. This is where permission-based authorization comes in. In this episode, we will explore some of the best of BlazorPlate's capabilities that enable the system admins to administer users' accounts using the permission-based authorization approach. The permission-based authorization approach is the replacement of the role-based authorization, as BlazorPlate introduces permissions at the role level or user level so that only specific roles and users can access the protected resources. Now I'm going to sign into the system as an administrator to show you how to manage users and their privileges within the system. First, I'm going to go to the roles list to add a new role. I'm going to call it Staff Sergeant and assign some permissions to it from the Permissions tab. Before selecting the permissions, let's look at the tree component to understand how it works. This component is used to retrieve a multi-level tree data structure. As you can see, I can click on any parent node to view its descendant nodes without latency, as all nodes and their children were fetched from the server at once during the component initialization. Loading a hierarchical data structure all at once is suitable for a small and mid-sized data hierarchy that takes a little time to load. I can use the Load on Demand option to load a large data hierarchy. This option allows fast rendering by requesting the minimum amount of data to be retrieved from the server so that the user can see the result in the tree and interact with the visible data as quickly as possible. Initially, only the root parents nodes are retrieved and rendered. Only after I expand a parent node, I will receive the descendant nodes for that particular parent. Loading on-demand functionality allows for caching the descendant nodes when they are initially requested from the server. If you re-expand a parent node, it will fetch the descendant nodes from the local storage. This approach significantly reduces the time required to load the child nodes and the amount of data being transferred between the browser and the server. This component can be easily configured to work with any remote data. Now I'm going to grant this role all permissions needed to perform all functions available in the Applicants module, except for creating Applicants permission. The Applicants module is one of BlazorPlate's proof of concepts that you can use to examine many features. I will explore those proof of concepts later in this series. Now I'm going to save this role. Note that the newly created roles do not have to be hard-coded within the source code. Roles in the BlazorPlate development environment are no longer static to the code, and they can be easily modified, added, and deleted at runtime. Dealing with roles at runtime requires devising a new mechanism to authorize users dynamically, and this is where the dynamic authorization approach in BlazorPlate comes in. I will explore this innovative approach more thoroughly later in this series. As I'm already assigned to the admin role and permitted to create new user accounts on behalf of other users, I'm going to go to the users list to add a new user and assign a role to that user. From the Roles tab, I'm going to assign the Sergeant role to the user that I'm creating. This pop-up contains a data grid with server-side filtering and pagination and allows for selecting or deselecting roles. As I'm creating a new user account, I want to point out that BlazorPlate has a multiple file upload component that allows us to upload an unlimited number of files. Also, it allows the developers to specify the allowed file extensions, maximum file size, and the minimum and the maximum number of files that a user can upload. Now I'm going to save this user. As we can see, our new user, Emerson Burton, has been successfully created. I can click on the Permissions button to view his permissions. As we can see, Emerson Burton has been granted all permissions except for Create Applicant permission. Those permissions were granted to him indirectly, which means they are inherited from the Sergeant role, the role that I've just assigned to him. BlazorPlate also allows me to revoke any of these permissions from Emerson Burton and grant new extra permissions to him directly without the need to edit the current role or create a new one. Now I'm going to log out, then log back into my tenant portal as Emerson Burton to force the authentication server to refresh the access token. Let's view some information related to Emerson's access token using the token decoder tool that can be accessed from the authorization menu in the Proof of Concepts section. This tool allows me to view the decoded version of the current access token. From the Claims tab, I can view the claims list payload, which came as a part of the current access token. A claim is a name-value pair representing what the subject is, not what the subject can do. For example, you may have a driving license issued by a local driving license authority. Your driving license has your date of birth on it. In this case, the claim name would be date of birth, and the claim value would be your date of birth, for example, June 4, 1990. Other examples of a claim would be the email address, profile picture path, full name, job title, and expiry date. The expiry date signifies the end of the access token lifespan. I will explain in more detail how to specify the validity period of the access token and how to refresh it just before it reaches its end of life later in this series. Let's check the role claim assigned to Emerson Burton. He should be assigned to the Sergeant role. Now let's go to the Permissions tab to check what he can do. As we can see, he is allowed to perform all tasks in the Applicants module except for creating an applicant. In the next episode, I will use the Applicants module to show you how BlazorPlate detects unauthorized users with insufficient permissions who try to access restricted resources within the system. Thank you for watching. In the previous episode, we explored some of BlazorPlate's capabilities that enable the system administrators to create accounts on behalf of other users, manage roles, grant permissions to a role, and assign a role to a specific user. In this episode, we will explore the client-side and the server-side authorization techniques that are used in BlazorPlate to prevent unauthorized users from accessing the restricted resources within the system. Both techniques can be used together in your application to gain better security and usability. So let's start examining these techniques. First of all, I want to introduce you to some demo users with varying permissions. John Smith is a full privileged user who has full access privilege throughout the entire Applicants module. Mandy Moore is a read-only user who is permitted only to view the applicant's profiles. Now I'm going to log out, then log back in as John Smith to perform a security test to examine if he is allowed to use all options in the applicant module according to his permissions. From the Proof of Concept section, I'm going to use the ClientSide Authorization module to evaluate the permissions granted to John Smith. As you can see, I can view the whole list of applicants and view the details of any applicant profile. In addition, I can edit any applicant profile. I can delete any applicant profile too. As we saw, John Smith is allowed to perform any action in the applicant's module according to the permissions granted to him. Now I'm going to repeat the same steps with Mandy Moore to examine her limited permissions in the applicant's module. As you can see, she is only allowed to view the whole list of applicants and their profiles according to the permissions granted to her. Notice that the Create, Update, and Delete buttons are hidden from this page. This is because a conditional statement was added to this page to show and hide these buttons based on the user's permissions. This is what we call client-side authorization, where the client application is responsible for checking whether the user has sufficient permissions to access a specific resource or not. Using client-side authorization alone is not recommended because there will be a good chance that one of the front-end developers uses some risky coding practices. These risky coding practices will significantly increase the likelihood of errors that would allow unintended access to some restricted resource. For this particular scenario, BlazorPlate utilizes the server-side authorization technique as a second line of defense to prevent unauthorized users from accessing restricted areas within the system. As we can deduce from the name of this technique, server-side authorization takes place on the server side, where every single request that comes from the client's applications is validated dynamically against the API's endpoints using the dynamic authorization method. I will explore this innovative method later in this series. Now let's examine the server-side authorization technique using the server-side authorization example, which can be found in the Proof of Concept section. I'm going to use this example to evaluate Mandy Moore's permissions by sending some requests to the applicant's API endpoints. Notice that the Create, Update, and Delete buttons are visible to me even though I only have read-only permissions. Let's see what will happen if I try to edit an applicant profile. As you can see, the server responds with a message indicating that I'm not allowed to call the Update applicant endpoint. Also, I'll get the same response when deleting an applicant. Using server-side authorization alone is also not recommended because it adds some extra cost in terms of performance, where the client app should always pass the request to the server to be validated before consuming the requested resource. So the best way to gain maximum security and performance measures is to use client-side authorization in conjunction with server-side authorization. So that if the client-side authorization fails for some reason, the server-side authorization will do the job. Thank you for watching. In the previous episodes, we explored so many security features, which are available out of the box in BlazorPlate's environment. One of those features is the permission-based authorization, which enables the system admin to grant specific permissions to roles and users and revoke permissions from them. Permissions in BlazorPlate are generated automatically during application startup and cannot be altered at runtime for security reasons. The BlazorPlate development team devised a revolutionary method of scanning the system for all potential permissions during application startup and authorizing users dynamically based on the permissions granted to them. This new method is called dynamic authorization. Dynamic authorization method makes the authorization process more dynamic and easy to manage, as you don't need to hard-coding the permissions and roles in your web API project. Instead, you can use the predefined permissions which have been generated during the application startup to define new authorization policies on the fly, the same way I did in the previous episodes. In this episode, I will show you a practical example of how to use the dynamic authorization technique in the BlazorPlate development environment. First, let's take a look at the permissions related to the applicant's module, which is the same module that I used in the previous episode to evaluate some authorization policies. These permissions are used to add access restrictions on the create, retrieve, update, and delete operations. For instance, a user cannot delete an applicant profile without having the delete permission. These operations take place in the applicant's API controller, which contains a set of action methods. Now I'm going to show you how the dynamic authorization method works in the BlazorPlate development environment. I'm going to use the applicant API controller as a case study to examine this method. As we can see, this controller is already decorated with BP authorize attribute. This attribute has two functions. First, it allows for generating the permissions based on the API controller actions. Second, it dynamically authenticates and authorizes the incoming requests for the protected resource. Now let's see the impact of removing this attribute. After saving the change, Visual Studio will automatically compile the Web API project using the hot reload feature. Now we have our Web API project compiled, so let's check the permissions related to the applicant API controller. Wait and see the magic. All permissions related to applicant's module have gone. What this means is that the entire applicant module can be accessed by all users regardless of their privileges, even if they are not authenticated at all. Now I'm going to undo the change to get back our authorize attribute. Notice that the applicant's module permissions have come back. As you can see, both API actions and their corresponding permissions have identical names. Now I guess you know the origins of these permissions and how they are generated. BlazorPlate is smart enough to automatically generate all potential permissions you need in your business application. If you want to make specific endpoints publicly accessible to all users without restriction, you can simply decorate them with Allow Anonymous attribute. Now let's make the getApplicant and getApplicant's endpoints publicly accessible. Decorating them with Allow Anonymous attribute will make their relevant permissions disappear from the permissions list. This means that all users, including anonymous users, can access these endpoints without any restrictions. As you can see, the getApplicant and getApplicant's permissions are not listed anymore in the permissions list. We can get these permissions back by removing the Allow Anonymous attribute. Thank you for watching. In the previous episodes, we found out how BlazorPlate relieves the developers of the burden of building the same cross-cutting features that they most likely need in every project. So far, we have explored so many built-in features aiming to speed up the project's development process and deliver them earlier. We will continue exploring and experimenting with many other built-in features throughout this series. In this episode, I will show you how to use some of the built-in settings within the BlazorPlate environment, which allows you to enforce security policies around password strength, login, and registration. As I'm already logged in as admin, I can reach these policies from the Identity Settings module under the Settings menu. The Identity Settings module contains a collection of settings related to the login and registration policies, so let's explore them one by one. Let's begin with the User Settings tab. In this tab, we will find two policy options. The Allowed Username Characters option allows you to specify the allowed characters that the users can use in the username during account registration. I will leave it as it is. This option indicates whether the new registered users' accounts are active by default or not. If I disable this option, the newly registered users will be unable to sign in after registration. This option allows the administrator to review the accounts of the newly registered users and activate them accordingly. I'm going to disable this option to prevent the new users from using their accounts until they are verified manually by the system admin. In the Sign-in Settings tab, the Required Confirmed Account Policy option indicates whether a confirmed email address is required for signing in. I'm going to disable this option to allow the users to sign in with an unconfirmed email. In the Password Settings tab, we will find a bunch of policy options. The Required Length option represents the minimum length of the password. The Required Unique Characters option represents the minimum number of unique characters which a password must contain. I'm going to leave these two options as they are, but I'm going to enable all of the other options which are required digits, require lowercase characters, required non-alphanumeric, and require uppercase characters. In the Lockout Settings tab, we will find some other security policies. Account lockout policies aim to prevent credential theft, credential stuffing, and brute force methods of guessing the username and password combinations. This is an important aspect of not only securing enterprise systems, but also securing users' personal accounts and information. The default approach to this is to make it harder for potential attackers to compromise accounts by slowing down the authentication cycle and making users wait longer and longer every time there is an unsuccessful login attempt. We can usually assume that legitimate users might mistype their password once or twice, but not numerous times. Therefore, multiple failed login attempts can indicate that someone is trying a brute force password attack. So I'm going to enforce this policy for all new users. The default lockout timespan option represents the time in minutes that the account can be locked out. For example, if the account locks out for 5 minutes, the user can try again after that time. I'm gonna leave it as it is. The maximum failed access attempts option represents the number of failed access attempts allowed before a user is locked out. I'm gonna change it from 5 to 3. Now, it's time to apply the new settings. Let's evaluate the impact of these settings in the sign-up form. I'm gonna sign up for a new account using Cameron's email address and a weak password to evaluate the current password policy. As we can see, the password policy was enforced as expected. Now I'm gonna try to sign up using a complex password to satisfy the password policy requirement. Notice that the system responds with a message indicating that the account has been created successfully. Also, it indicates that the account is deactivated according to the sign-in policy. Therefore, I will no longer be able to sign in as Cameron Lewis unless the system admin activates his account. So I'm going to go to the users list from the other window to activate Cameron's account. As we see, Cameron's account is indeed created and deactivated, so I'm going to click on Edit, then I'm going to go to the Account tab to set the suspend flag to false. After saving the form, notice that Cameron's account is now activated, but his email is not confirmed yet. Now I'm going to go to the other window to log into Cameron's account. Notice that I managed to log into Cameron's account even though his email address is unconfirmed, since the current sign-in policy doesn't require using a valid email address during registration. There is one more policy I want to evaluate. I'm going to log out, then try to log into the same account, but this time, I'm going to use an invalid password. Notice that if I try to sign in more than 3 times, the system will enforce the current lockout policy on Cameron's account and get it locked out for 5 minutes. Thank you for watching. In the previous episode, we explored the built-in security settings within the BlazorPlate environment. We saw how to use these settings to enforce security policies during registration and login. BlazorPlate's authentication system generates an access token each time a user logs into the system. In this episode, I will show you another type of security policies that allows the system admin to determine the validity period of user's access token. To see how this could be done, let's go to the token settings under the Settings menu. The access token timespan field represents the period of time the access token remains valid after being issued. We can use hour, day, or month as a base unit. The client application is expected to refresh or obtain a new access token after reaching the end of its lifetime, which is, in this case, 5 minutes. An access token or JSON web token contains the security credentials for a login session and identifies the user's roles and privileges. It also may contain some supplementary information, such as the date of birth and the path of the profile picture. Access tokens are used in token-based authentication to allow the client application to access an API. The client application receives an access token after a user successfully authenticates and authorizes access, then passes the access token as a credential when it calls the target API. The pass token informs the API that the bearer of the token has been authorized to access the API and perform specific actions specified by the scope that was granted during authorization. The refresh token timespan field represents the period of time the refresh token remains valid after being issued. The default is 60 minutes. Again, we can use hour, day, or month as a base unit. A refresh token is a credential artifact that lets a client application get new access tokens without having to ask the user to log in again in order to obtain a new access token. Therefore, refresh token is typically longer-lived than access token. A refresh token is issued to the client by the authorization server upon an access token request, and it is used to generate a new access token. The client application can get a new access token as long as the refresh token is valid and unexpired. Each time a refresh token is used to generate a new access token, the refresh token is revoked and replaced by a new refresh token. This technique is known as refresh token rotation. Refresh token rotation is used in BlazorPlate to increase security by reducing refresh token lifetime. For evaluation purposes, I'm going to adjust the default token lifetime policy by changing the value of the access token timespan from 5 minutes to 1 minute and changing the value of the refresh token timespan from 60 minutes to 2 minutes. Now, it's time to evaluate these settings. First, I'm going to log out, then log back into the system to obtain a new access token. Then, I'm going to run the stopwatch immediately after login. Now let's see how the BlazorPlate authentication system will enforce the new lifetime policy on my new access token. I'm going to force the client application to call some API during the first minute of my login session. Each time the client app submits a request to an API decorated with an authorize attribute, the authentication system will validate whether the access token in the authorization request header is correct and not expired. In our case, the access token lifetime is set for 1 minute, and the refresh token lifetime is set for 2 minutes. The client app should receive 200 status code as long as both access and refresh tokens are not expired. Let's see what happens to my access token when we reach the end of the first minute. The user's token should be invalidated, and the user should be logged out of the system, but instead, the client app has sent a request to the refresh token API asking for renewing the access token and extending its lifespan for another minute. As you can see, I can use the system as long as the refresh token is valid and unexpired. But what will happen to my access token when the refresh token expires? As the refresh token lifetime is set for 2 minutes, I'm going to reset the stopwatch and wait until it's expired. When the refresh token expires, it can no longer be used to get a new access token. The user will be required to re-authenticate the next time they use the application. More importantly, an attacker's window for using a leaked token is limited. As our refresh token is just expired, I'm going to access a page that requires authorization, such as the roles list page. The system should redirect me to the 401 page. And indeed, this is what we expected. Thank you for watching. In the previous episodes, we saw how to upload single and multiple files using the file upload component that comes out of the box with BlazorPlate. This component has a predefined set of properties such as allowed file types and maximum file size. Uploading large files from within the system is governed by many factors, including storage policy and storage capacity. One of the most remarkable capabilities of BlazorPlate is its ability to switch from one storage service to another according to the factors I've mentioned before. For example, suppose you are running out of storage space. In that case, you can switch the system to use the cloud storage method in exchange for paying monthly subscription fees. If you are running out of budget, you can switch the system back to using the on-premise storage method to take advantage of the available storage resources in your organization. In this episode, I will show you how switching between cloud and on-premise storage techniques within the BlazorPlate environment takes almost zero time. Now let's go to the storage settings under the Settings menu. As we can see, the storage method is currently set to on-premise. On-premise storage means your company's server is hosted within your organization's infrastructure and, in many cases, physically on-site. The server is controlled, administered, maintained, and procured by your company and its in-house IT team or an IT partner. I'm going to leave this option as is, and then I'm going to go to the users list to add a nice profile picture for Mandy Moore. After updating Mandy Moore's profile, I'm going to go back to her profile picture to see where it came from by inspecting its path. As can be noted from the path of this picture is stored physically in the server where this demo application is hosted. Now, I'm going to go back to the storage settings page to force the system to use the cloud storage method by switching to Azure Cloud Storage. Keep in mind that you can use any other cloud storage provider such as Amazon Web Services. This can be done by implementing the functionalities provided by your storage provider using Storage Service Interface, which is referenced in the infrastructure project within the BlazorPlate solution. With cloud storage, an outside service provider, such as Microsoft Azure's, hosts your files. The cloud provider procures, installs, and maintains all hardware, software, and other supporting infrastructure in its data centers. I'm going to go back to the users list and update Mandy Moore's profile by uploading another nice picture. Let's go back to our profile to inspect the path of the new profile picture. As we can see, the path of this picture indicates that it is stored as a binary file inside the Azure Blob container. As I mentioned before, it takes zero effort to switch between storage methods within the BlazorPlate environment. This is because BlazorPlate is smart enough to resolve the storage services dependencies in the DI container dynamically at runtime. This will keep your application up and running during switching between storage methods. Thank you for watching. Data validation is one of the most critical activities in software development. Having a clear strategy that ensures data integrity is crucial for any business application. Therefore, the BlazorPlate development team was keen to use the most effective methods that assist in creating complex validation rules. For this reason, they decided to use the Fluent Validation library for several considerations. Fluent validation gives better control of validation rules and makes them easy to read, easy to test, and enables great separation of concerns. Fluent Validation Library includes several built-in validators like regular expression, email validator, credit card validator, and many more. Fluent Validation Library allows for creating custom and reusable validators, and also it allows for adding translations for the validation messages in several languages. Another nice feature in the Fluent Validation Library is the ability to implement conditional validation rules using the when and unless methods to specify conditions that control when the rule should execute. In this episode, we will see how the Fluent Validation Library works very nicely with BlazorPlate. I'm going to use the Apply for Military form to evaluate some validation rules which are implemented using the Fluent Validation Library. This form is located under the Army menu in the Proof of Concept section. Now, I'm going to submit this form before filling it out. As we can see, the system responds with a list of validation messages. So let's fill out this form with valid data. One of the conditional validation rules defined in this form indicates that only those aged between 18 and 28 are eligible to join the military. So I'm going to break this rule by entering an invalid date of birth to trigger a validation message. As a result, the system responds with a validation message indicating that the age of the applicant shouldn't be less than 18 or greater than 28. So I'm going to enter a valid date of birth and continue filling in the form. In the Body Max Index section, the system automatically calculates the Body Max Index or BMI field depending on the applicant's height and weight. If the applicant's BMI is not within the normal range, the system should respond with a validation message, and that's exactly what we are seeing. I'm going to enter a valid height and weight and then submit the form. The form that I've just filled out uses client-side validation to validate user inputs before submitting the form. Client-side validation takes place on the web browser. A client-side input validation check can improve application performance by catching malformed input on the client and, therefore, saving a round trip to the server. For example, suppose the user enters an invalid email format. In that case, the system can show an error message immediately before the user moves to the next field, so the user can correct every field before they submit the form. Client-side validation provides a great user experience, but this must always be backed up by server-side validation for security reasons. In the server-side validation, the user's input is sent to the server and validated by the command validator object. If the command validator detects that the user's input violates one or more validation rules, the feedback is sent back to the user, indicating that something went wrong. It is better to validate user input on the server side to prevent malicious users, who can easily bypass your client-side validation rules, from submitting dangerous inputs to the server. Last but not least, I want to point out that in the BlazorPlate environment, you can use the same validator objects in client-side and server-side validation. Thank you for watching. With the growing demands of software products all over the world and with the growing software market far beyond the English-speaking world, it's important for the software to be world-ready for all potential customers by supporting various languages and data formats. To make that happen, the most crucial step is to design the software with globalization and localization in mind. Localization of a software product requires that the product be adapted to both the language and the culture of a particular market. Unlike a translated book, the product must adhere to a particular locale's conventions and culture. In fact, the final localized version of the original product should look and feel as if it had been designed in the user's home country. Some examples of other things that need to be adapted based on locale include currency, address, number, and date formats, the sort order, and for many Asian languages, the fonts and the font size. In this episode, I will provide some generic information about the concepts of globalization and localization that BlazorPlate supports. Now I'm going to open up the culture info, time zone info, and date time format pages, which are located under the Proof of Concepts menu. The culture info page represents culture-specific information, such as the language, country and region, calendar, and conventions associated with a particular culture. Right-to-left languages such as Arabic and Hebrew require an inverted layout not only of the text but of the whole user interface, including buttons, menus, and dialog boxes. The time zone info page represents some information about the time zone used by the browser. A time zone is one of the areas into which the world is divided where the time is calculated as being a particular number of hours behind or ahead of Coordinated Universal Time or UTC. The date time format page represents other culture-specific information for the selected culture, such as the patterns used to format date and time values, the names of the days, the names of the months, the AM and PM designators used in time values, and the calendar in which dates are expressed. As you noticed, the UI text translations are changed according to the selected language. From the Proof of Concepts menu, I'm going to open up the Resources page to show you how to render the translated strings in the UI. This page contains sample texts that can be displayed in different languages. These texts are typically stored in multilingual resource files. Multilingual resources allow you to dynamically display text in the language selected by the current user. BlazorPlate uses resource files in XML format to localize the names of the UI labels, as well as other text in the user interface. BlazorPlate solution contains two types of resources, the front-end and back-end resources. You can use the front-end resources to manage the localized strings used in your front-end application. Also, you can use the back-end resources to localize your API notifications, such as form validation messages, success messages, and error messages. You can use Resource Manager extension that uses cloud-based machine translation services such as Microsoft Translator or Google Translate API to assist in the translation of localization strings. Resource Manager is a free extension, and you can install it from Visual Studio Marketplace. When you add a resource file to your solution, a designer file would be created, providing static strongly typed access to your resources by calling the resource by its name followed by the key of the target string. In BlazorPlate, resources can be accessed through Localization Service class that implements iString localizer abstraction, which is typically injected where needed via dependency injection. This interface has an indexer that allows you to access resources by a string key. If no resource exists for the key, then the key itself is used as the resource. You aren't limited to using XML resource files. By implementing iString localizer, any data source can be used, such as Excel spreadsheet, JSON, SQL database. You can use one of those data sources in your project, depending on the project's requirements. Thank you for watching. Multi-tenant software architecture, which enables multiple users to share a single instance of a software application and its underlying resources, is the foundation of most software-as-a-service offerings. Software as a service or SaaS is a software licensing and delivery model in which software is licensed on a subscription basis and is centrally hosted. One of the most challenging tasks in SaaS development is ensuring data isolation, where each tenant's data is isolated and remains invisible to other tenants. In this episode, I will present one of the most outstanding capabilities of BlazorPlate that allows developers to build multi-tenant business applications in an effective and easy manner. With just a few settings, you can quickly and easily switch your application to operate in single-tenant mode or multi-tenant mode. A tenant can be an individual user, but more frequently, it's a group of users, such as a customer organization, that share a common access with specific privileges to the software instance. In single-tenant architecture, a single instance of the software and supporting infrastructure serves a single customer. With a single tenancy, each customer has their own independent database and instance of the software. So essentially, there is no sharing happening with this option. In multi-tenant architecture, a single instance of a software application and its underlying database serves multiple tenants. Each tenant has a dedicated share of the instance, including data, configuration, and user management. The data associated with each tenant is isolated from and invisible to the other tenants sharing the application instance, ensuring data security and privacy for all tenants. Now let's see how the multi-tenancy feature works in practice within the BlazorPlate environment. In the previous episodes, we used the XYZ Corporation tenant to explore so many features in BlazorPlate. Now I'm going to create a new tenant using the host application that comes integrated with BlazorPlate. I will name the new tenant ABC Corporation. During the tenant creation process, the system will see the tenant database with some default objects, such as the default users, roles, and permissions. In many multi-tenant web applications, a domain name can be used as a way to identify a tenant, where each tenant accesses their environment via their own subdomain to help with routing requests and to provide a branded experience to your customers. BlazorPlate uses subdomains as a tenant identification strategy, and this is the most robust strategy and probably the most widely used. In the BlazorPlate development environment, you don't have to create a new subdomain for each tenant. Instead, you only need to add a wildcard DNS record that points to your Blazor app hostname. A wildcard DNS record is a record that will match requests for non-existent subdomains. Using the wildcard DNS record, you can create an unlimited number of tenants, including subdomains on the fly. Now I'm going to sign into my new tenant, then I'm going to go to the users list. As we can see in this list, the system automatically generated some default users accounts for this tenant, and one of these accounts belongs to John Smith. Now let's compare this list with the users list related to the XYZ Corporation tenant, just to see the difference. As you notice, there is another account belonging to John Smith in XYZ Corporation tenant, even though his accounts in both tenants are linked with the same email address. As you see, the main difference between his accounts is that this one has a profile picture and the other account in ABC Corporation tenant does not. This difference indicates that you can use the same email address to create different accounts in multiple tenants within BlazorPlate without any conflicts, since the data associated with each tenant is fully isolated from the other tenants. To make sure that the data in both tenants are completely isolated from each other, I'm going to make some major changes to John Smith's account in ABC Corporation tenant and compare it with John Smith's account in the other tenant. As I logged in as an admin, I'm going to change the account owner's name from John Smith to Thomas Williams. Then, I'm going to modify his login email as well. Now I'm going to save these changes to this account that belongs to the ABC Corporation tenant and compare it with the other account in the XYZ Corporation tenant. Therefore, I'm going to refresh the users list page in the XYZ Corporation tenant to make sure that John Smith's account is still intact. This comparison indicates that each tenant's data is isolated from and invisible to the other tenants even though they share the same database. In BlazorPlate, data isolation is not only confined to simple data operations, but also takes place in every corner of the system. Let's take another example to prove that the policies and configurations for each tenant are also isolated. I'm going to force the new users who want to sign up for a new account in the ABC Corporation to use a complex password during registration, while allowing the new users to sign up for a new account in the XYZ Corporation using a simple password. Now I'm going to log out of both tenants and then, I'm going to sign up for a new account on ABC Corporation tenant using a complex password. However, in this case, the system should enforce password complexity rules and prevent me from signing up as the provided password doesn't comply with the tenant password policy. When signing up on XYZ Corporation tenant, the situation should be different. It should allow me to create a new account using a simple password according to the tenant password policy. As I mentioned before, with just a few settings, you can quickly and easily switch your application to operate in single-tenant mode or multi-tenant mode. So let's see how this could be done. I'm going to open up the BlazorPlate solution in Visual Studio. Then I'm going to open the app settings file within the Web API project. As we can see, the connection string points to a database called BinaryPlate. This database serves only a single tenant. In single tenant mode, a single instance of the software serves a single customer, where each customer has their own database. In multi-tenant mode, a single instance of the application and its underlying database serves multiple tenants or customers. To force the system to operate in multi-tenant mode, I'm going to change the tenant mode value from 1 to 2. Now I'm going to create a multi-tenant database by generating a new migration script and executing it. Before executing the migration script, I want to make sure that I don't have any databases in my SQL Server. Now I'm going to execute the script to create our first shared database that supports multi-tenants. As the script was successfully executed, I'm going to check our newly created database to see how it supports multi-tenancy. So let's take a look at the applicants table, for example. When expanding the table columns node, we will see the tenant ID field, which is basically a unique identifier that represents the record owner. The primary function of the tenant ID field is to isolate the data related to each tenant and prevent these data from being visible to other tenants, ensuring data security and privacy for all tenants. Now I'm going to switch the application back to the single tenant mode by changing the value of the tenant mode option to 1. After changing the value, I'm going to add and execute a new migration script to update our database. Now I'm going to refresh the database, and then I'm going to go back to the applicants table columns to see if there is any difference. As we notice, the tenant ID field does not exist because it is no longer needed in single tenant mode. Thank you for watching. Applications that follow the dependency inversion principle, as well as the domain-driven design principles, tend to arrive at a similar architecture. This architecture has gone by many names over the years. One of the first names was hexagonal architecture, followed by ports and adapters. More recently, it's been cited as the onion architecture or clean architecture. The latter name, clean architecture, has become widely used in the last years. The BinaryPlate solution template uses the clean architecture approach in organizing its code into projects. BinaryPlate is the codename of the BlazorPlate template. In this episode, I will give you a general overview of clean architecture. Also, I will walk you through the layers of the BinaryPlate solution. Clean architecture is a software design philosophy that separates the elements of a design into ring levels. An important goal of clean architecture is to provide developers with a way to organize code in such a way that it encapsulates the business logic. The main rule of clean architecture is that code dependencies can only move from the outer levels inward. Code on the inner layers can have no knowledge of functions on the outer layers. The variables, functions, and classes that exist in the outer layers cannot be referenced in the inward levels. Like other software design philosophies, clean architecture attempts to provide a cost-effective methodology that makes it easier to develop quality code that will perform better, make it easier to change, and have fewer dependencies. A common way of visualizing this architecture is to use a series of concentric circles, similar to an onion. This diagram shows an example of this style of architectural representation. In this diagram, dependencies flow toward the innermost circle. The purple circles represent the core layer, which takes its name from its position at the core of this diagram, and it consists of two sublayers, the application layer and the domain layer. And you can see on the diagram that the core layer has no dependencies on the other layers. Outside of the core layer, both the presentation and the infrastructure layers depend on the application core, but not on one another. In a clean architecture solution, each layer has clear responsibilities. As such, certain types belong in each layer, and you'll frequently find folders corresponding to these types in the appropriate project. The presentation layer in the BinaryPlate solution is the entry point for the application, and it consists of 3 projects: the host app project, the BlazorPlate project, and the Web API project. The BlazorPlate project is a single-page application based on a standalone Blazor WebAssembly. It is the main UI project that can be used as a starting point for all UI-related functionalities in your application. The host project is the entry point for creating new tenants. The BlazorPlate project and the host project use the Web API project to send and receive data through RESTful APIs. Web API project depends on both the application and infrastructure layers. However, the dependency on the infrastructure layer is only to support dependency injection. The Web API project receives HTTP requests from users via API controllers and wraps them in request objects, which are typically data transfer objects. The API controllers act as a mediator between the outside world and the use cases in the application layer. A data transfer object is an object that is used to encapsulate data and send it from one subsystem of an application to another. These request objects are sent to the corresponding command and query handlers via a mediator object. The command and query handlers are responsible to pass request objects to the corresponding use cases in the application layer. In software and systems engineering, a use case is a list of actions or event steps typically defining the interactions between a user and a system to achieve a goal. The action methods in Web API controllers convert the outputs of the use case into JSON objects that are rendered as HTTP responses. The Web API project should reference the application project, and its types should interact with the infrastructure strictly through interfaces defined in the application layer. No direct instantiation of or static calls to the infrastructure project types should be allowed in the UI project, which is, in this case, the BlazorPlate project. The infrastructure project typically includes data access implementations. In a typical ASP.NET Core web application, these implementations include data access implementations such as the Entity Framework DB context and Entity Framework migration objects. In addition to data access implementations, the infrastructure project should contain implementations of infrastructure-specific services, for example, File Logger or SMTP Notifier. These services should implement interfaces defined in the application layer, and so infrastructure should have a reference to the application core project. The infrastructure layer may contain other types of infrastructure projects, such as the application resources that are used for localization concerns. Application layer implements the use cases of the application based on the domain entities defined in the domain layer. A use case can be thought of as a user interaction on the user interface. The use case folder contains all application logic. It is dependent on the domain layer but has no dependencies on any other layer or project. These use cases orchestrate the flow of data to and from the entities and direct those entities to use their critical business rules to achieve the goals of the use case. By design, the orchestration will depend on abstractions of external services. The application layer defines interfaces implemented by the outside layers. For example, if a use case needs to access an email service, you would add a new interface for the email service to the application layer and implement it within the infrastructure layer. In general, the application layer contains abstractions, interfaces, application services, commands and queries handlers, exceptions, DTOs, object mappers, and validators. Domain layer implements the core, use case independent business logic of the domain. By design, this layer is highly abstracted and stable. The main difference between the domain layer and the application layer is that the domain layer contains enterprise logic and business entities. In contrast, the application layer contains use case-specific business logic. The difference is that enterprise logic in the domain layer could be shared across many systems, whereas the business logic in the application layer will typically only be used within a system. The domain layer contains a considerable amount of domain entities and should not depend on external libraries and frameworks. Ideally, it should be loosely coupled even to the .NET framework. Domain project is core and backbone project. It is the heart and center project of the clean architecture design. All other projects should be dependent on the domain project. This project contains the high-level modules which describe the domain via aggregate roots, entities, value objects, enums, and constants. The benefit of using clean architecture is that it produces systems that are independent of the user interface and database and independent of any external agency. Thank you for watching.